Well, good afternoon and welcome to a webinar on the economics of soil health systems on Michigan farms. My name is Byron Rath and I serve as the Soil Health Institute Sustainability Specialist. Soil Health Institute is a 501c3 nonprofit, and our mission is to enhance and protect the vitality and productivity of soil through scientific research and advancement. Today's webinar is our last in a series of 9 state-based webinars on the economics of soil health systems. The research that we'll share today aims to address the most frequent question that we receive from farmers, landowners, and their advisors. And that is, what are the economics of adopting soil health practices and systems? So to answer this question and address this knowledge gap, we interviewed 100 farmers across 9 states who have successfully adopted soil health systems. And today we'll be sharing the results from 10 farms that we assessed in Michigan. Next month, we'll be releasing an aggregated fact sheet of all 100 farms assessed throughout the 9-state region in the Upper Midwest. Regarding the experimental design, this project was not designed to be a random sample of all farmers and their economics, but instead was designed to intentionally interview farmers who've been successfully implementing soil health systems for 5 or more years in order to understand the economics of those systems as compared to their conventional counterparts. So tomorrow, you'll be receiving a recording of this webinar and an associated fact sheet, and that information can also be found on the Soil Health Institute's website at soilhealthinstitute.org/economics. So during today's presentation, please enter your questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen and upvote any questions that you share, and our speakers will address those in our last 15 minutes. And so a big thanks to Cargill. Without their support, this research would not be possible. And a sincere thanks to the 10 farmers in Michigan and the 90 farmers in the other 8 states who agreed to be interviewed as part of this research. Without Cargill's support and those farmers' participation, these results would not be possible.
This is Wayne Honeycutt, and I have the pleasure of serving as the president and CEO for the Soil Health Institute. And I also want to extend our gratitude to Cargill and many folks there that helped with this project. I know that from having attended 8 of these in the last 8 weeks, some of the items that Ryan would like to highlight. One is that, Cargill is very committed to increasing adoption of these soil health regenerative agricultural systems, because they see that as a way of really benefiting farmers and also providing numerous environmental benefits, and not only to the farms, but to society. And also know that one of their interests is ensuring that in helping farmers adopt these systems, that they are economically viable for farmers. And so that's kind of a key component that I know that he likes to point out. But that has been one of the big gaps in information, as Byron was just describing, is that lack of knowledge of just what the economic experiences are for farmers that are adopting these systems. And so I will, stop there and welcome you on behalf of both the Soil Health Institute and on the Cargill's behalf. Turn it over to you, Archie. I guess I'll quickly introduce Archie Flanders too. Dr. Archie Flanders is the agricultural economist with the Soil Health Institute. He's previously got his PhD at the University of Georgia and served at a couple of different universities before coming to the Soil Health Institute. And so he has been the lead economist on this project. Dr. John Shanahan was the agronomist and project manager. He just recently took a different position outside of SHI, so he's not able to join us today. But he was also key in working directly with Cargill, with the folks not only at the Cargill headquarters near Minneapolis, but also with the folks on the ground to identify a number of farmers that have been successfully adopting these soil systems so they could be interviewed for this project. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Dr. Flanders.
Thank you, Wayne. And also, I would like to express our gratitude to Cargill for making this possible. They were strong supporters of this. We're realizing the need for this type of analysis. We appreciate their participation, but also we appreciate the participation of all the farmers who were in our interviews and provided the data for us to do the analysis. it's been well documented the benefits of soil health management systems for improving the inherent qualities of soil at the farm site, also the extended environmental benefits of soil health management systems. So the soil benefits and the environment benefits from soil health management systems, but what has been lacking in knowledge is the economics. Farming is a business. Farmers have to be able to realize increased profitability from adopting these systems. Otherwise, they will be reluctant to do so. So realizing that there's a lack of information for the economics of adopting soil health management systems, that was our objectives, to provide economic information for farmers so they could make the decision of adopting soil health management systems based on profitability. Our approach was in Michigan. We sought and interviewed 10 Michigan farmers who had adopted soil health management systems for a minimum of 5 years. This means that the farmers have adopted soil health management systems and they have been determined to be profitable, and therefore they were in our sample. Based on the production information from these farmers, we calculated partial budgets to compare benefits and costs before and after soil health management systems were adopted. We have more information about this methodology on our Soil Health Institute websites. The methodology is termed partial budgets because we only are interested in the part of the budget that has to do with adopting the soil health management system. So we're only concerned with the differences between management systems when we're conducting partial budget analysis. Recognizing that market prices do fluctuate, any increase in yields due to the soil health management systems have average long-term crop prices applied to them to determine the revenue benefits of adopting a soil health management system. We have more information in this. This methodology is referenced in the fact sheets and as well as our website. For example, when we first started doing this project, corn and soybean prices were at historical lows. Now that we're in the final stages of this project, corn and soybean prices are at historical highs. Well, we wouldn't want to include either one of those extremes in our analysis, so we used data to come up with long-term average prices to apply to any increased yields. Also, USDA payments were not included in the analysis. Many farmers told us that they got started with soil health management systems by using USDA programs such as EQIP. But these programs often have only a limited time of availability for farmers. It's helped many of them get started, but we didn't want to potentially conflict our results for the benefits of the soil health management system adoption by including something that may only be temporary. These are characteristics of the 10 Michigan farms. You see that we have a distribution that's mostly located in the eastern part of the state. And then we have the annual participation documented and an annual temperature and growing degree days for corn. I want to point this out at this time. We'll talk about it more later, but Michigan, with its average growing degree days of 2,600, was equal to South Dakota in the fewest number of growing degree days, and only Minnesota had fewer, but it was only 50 fewer days. And we'll talk about this more later when we get to the cover crop section of the presentation. We see for the crops, we have evidence that there is some corn-soybean rotation, but soybean acreage is somewhat more than corn acreage. And we have other crops and wheat that were also grown by our farmers in the sample. And so the total cropland is 1,278 acres. So this means that these farms that we are using in the analysis are full-scale, large commercial farms. So any results that we get aren't just due to the potentially small size of the farms. These are the results from the characteristics of the farmers in our sample. We see that 89% of the acreage in our sample was under no-till production. This compares to, for the state of Michigan as a whole, only 25% of the acreage is in no-till production. And for the U.S., only 37% of the acreage is in no-till production. So the farmers in our survey sample are well out ahead of the state and the U.S. in adoption of no-till production. So the balance of the acreage that was not in no-till production in our sample was in reduced till. We didn't have any farms in our sample that were practicing intensive till production. And for cover crop acreage, 83% of the acreage in our survey sample was planted with cover crops. And this is well ahead of the Michigan state average, which is 11% of the acreage. And of course, the U.S. acreage is only 5%. So the farmers in our survey sample were well ahead of the state of Michigan and the U.S. in adoption of no-till production, as well as planting cover crops. So these are the results from our partial budget analysis. And before we go into the details of the results, let's take a look at what this table entails. We have benefits and costs. If you adopt the soil health management system, you're potentially going to have benefits. These are going to be in the form of reduced expenses. Also, if you adopt the soil health management system, you're going to have additional expenses. So these are costs. So the entire analysis is based on comparing benefits to costs. So for example, we'll take a look at corn. The reduced benefits, the reduced expenses, which are benefits, are in the green column. And additional benefits, with additional expenses, which are costs, are in the red columns. So let's take a look at the first line. This is seed. Overall, in our sample of 100 farmers, additional expenses and reduced expenses could either be seed treatments that you no longer need, or seed treatments that are added as you adopt the soil health management system. But mostly, additional seed expenses are cover crop seed. The interesting thing about the Michigan sample is all 10 farmers planted cover crops before the corn crop and the soybean crop. And they didn't have any other seed expenses. So these results that we see, the $17.60 for seed for corn and $16.80 for soybeans, are the actual cover crop seed cost. And I'll relate this back to the growing degree days available, which in Michigan are comparatively short compared to other farms in our 100 farm sample. Every farm in our sample was planting cover crops before corn and soybeans. And typically you hear one reason that it's not possible to use cover crops is because the growing is such a northern latitude. When the growing season is too short, you can't grow the cover crops. But the Michigan results show that, yes, it is possible to use cover crops in more northern latitudes. Next category is fertilizers and amendments. We didn't have any additional fertilizer expenses due to adoption of the whole soil health management system. We did have reduced expenses, $31.69 for corn, $17.60 for soybean. Typically, the reduction for corn is greater than the reduction for soybeans because corn has a nitrogen requirement. So you would have fertilizer benefits. Nitrogen is an additional reduction over potassium and phosphorus that's used in soybeans. Next category is fuel, electricity, labor, and services. Fuel and labor usually coincide with reduction in equipment expenses. As you adopt no-till production, of course, you're going to reduce equipment usage in the field, so you're going to have less fuel expense and also less labor requirements to run the equipment. And then equipment ownership is, in our analysis, is converted to a per acre basis. As you adopt no-till production, you're able to reduce the amount of equipment, and you have a reduced annual expense for that. Our methodology gives more information about how we calculate per acre expenses for equipment. And so then finally at the bottom of the expense category, we have the reduction in expenses for corn, $80.25, compared to additional expenses for adopting the soil health management system of only $50.47. So just from adopting the soil health management system and production expenses reduced, we see that the net income was going to increase approximately $30 without any regard to what the yield results would be. Similarly for corn, or similarly for soybeans, the net difference is about $20 increase in net farm income due to adopting the soil health management system, just due to reduction in production expenses. Now going on down, we have a category related to revenue. Over our sample of Michigan farmers, the average yield increase was 2.3 bushels per acre. We did have 2 reports of decreased yield. The average decrease was 3.5. So applying the long-term average price, the benefit as an additional revenue was $9.66. However, reduced revenue as a cost is slightly greater on a per acre average at $14.70 cost. Over for soybeans, the average yield increase was 1.8 bushels. With the long-term average price, that's $18 in increased revenue. And there were no reports of decreased yield for soybeans. So the net, the bottom line is the change in the net farm income for corn is $24.74, and for soybeans it's $38.38 for adopting a soil health management system. In Michigan, as I indicated earlier, we did have some additional crops produced besides corn and soybean in our sample for adopting the soil health management systems. We're not going to present tables for those, but we did have 2 farmers who adopted the soil health management system for wheat, and they increased their net farm income $7.37 per acre for wheat. We had 4 farms producing dried bean, and their net farm income increased an average of $54.28 when adopting the soil health management system for dried bean. And there was 1 farm producing sugar beet with the soil health management system, and the net farm income increased $47.35. There was 1 farm harvesting and baling cover crop as a forage. This was a cover crop planted before corn, and the increase in net farm income due to baling the forage, the cover crop as a forage, was $100 per acre. So now looking at the net farm income on an individual farm basis, we see that for the 10 farms, 8 farms had increases in net farm income that ranged from a low of $2 per acre to a high of $94 per acre. There were 2 farms that reported a decrease in net farm income for corn. For soybean, we had 9 farms that reported an increase in net farm income that ranged from $12 to $123 per acre. And 1 farm reported a decrease in net farm income for soybean due to adopting the soil health management system. When we look at these decreases, let's keep this in perspective. These decreases are changes. It doesn't mean that the farm is not profitable, but it does mean that the change is lower than what it was before the soil health management system was adopted. An additional perspective, keep in mind that maybe one time for one crop, a farm does take a loss for a crop, but the increase for the other crop more than offsets the decrease. Also, there are cases, especially during periods when soil health management systems are adopted during times of financial crisis, that a decrease in net farm income, even though the total farm profit is still positive, a decrease in net farm income could be preferable to the alternative, and the alternative could have been bankruptcy and going out of business. This is especially true when you consider the debt holding for equipment. Sometimes holding great debt for equipment puts a farm under financial stress. So by going to no-till, they're actually able to reduce some of these debt expenses. So even though their annual net farm income does decrease from the conventional situation, they are still profitable and they can remain in business. We asked the farmers in our interview some additional benefits of adopting the soil health management system in addition to collecting information to do the partial budget analysis. 40% reported an increased yield for some crop due to a soil health management system. 90% reported reduced fertilizer inputs, and all of them in Michigan reported increased crop resilience and increased access to fields. Increased crop resilience is most often realized as during periods of drought, when a crop typically goes into stress due to lack of moisture. The soil is now holding more moisture, and more moisture is available for the plant, and it doesn't go into stress as it would be if it was conventionally tilled. Increased access to field for activities is most often related to periods of excessive rainfall. For example, during the planting season, if you're using no-till and cover crops, you get better drainage typically. So if you have a heavy period of rain, your field will, the water will percolate down. You can get into your field, you have better soil structure. You can get into your field and plant when others around you that are doing conventional tillage cannot. And similarly for a harvesting period. Many times you have excessive rainfall when it's time for harvest, and you have better soil structure when no-till and cover crops. And so the soil will uphold the heavy harvesting equipment so you can get in and harvest, and you won't rut the field, so they'll have to be repaired before next year. 40% of the farms reported improved loan, land, or insurance terms, and typically this would be, when it was reported, yes, related to land. They were able to rent land that they otherwise wouldn't be able to rent because the landlord wanted the soil health management system practiced on their land. All the farms reported improved water quality. Most often this was determined by visual observation of the runoff. They could notice that when water did run off their fields, it was clear. And they could tell that when water was running off from farms around them, that the water was muddy. Some farmers actually looked into measured in their drain tile and could determine quantitatively that the water quality had been improved. 9 of the farmers, 90%, reported that they thought the soil health management systems were protecting their license to operate. And this meant that they thought that it was heading off potential regulation, and they wanted to go ahead and adopt these practices before they were forced to. And I remember the one who didn't answer yes, didn't answer no, but this farmer did report that he just wasn't sure. But many farmers adopt these practices, and they think that they're going to be able to head off regulation before everybody else is forced to do these type of practices. And then finally, 50% of the farmers reported that the soil health management systems of no-till and cover crops was increasing organic matter. A summary of our significant findings for the Michigan farmers are that the average farm size was 1,278 acres. No-till was used on 89% of the acreage. Cover crops were planted on 83% of the acreage. Soil health management systems reduced average production costs by $29.24 per acre for corn and $20.96 per acre for soybean. When you add yield changes, we see that the soil health management systems increased average net farm income by $24.74 for corn and $38.38 per acre for soybeans. Therefore, based on the current adoption rates that we looked at earlier, 25% no-till and 11% cover crops in Michigan, based on this, more Michigan farmers could increase their net farm income by adopting soil health management systems. Again, I'd like to thank Ryan and Cargill for recognizing the need for this economic analysis and supporting this work. And also, again, recognize and appreciate the farmers for participating. All of them were eager participants. They wanted to share this information so that other farmers would know what has been successful for them so that they could also adopt it for themselves and be as successful as the farmers in our sample had been. Okay, Byron?
All right, thank you very much, Dr. Flanders. We have a few questions. Just a reminder to all attendees, if you have a question, please enter it in the Q&A box. And if we can't get to those in the next 10 minutes or so, then we'll be sure to follow up by email. Nicole Chardul asks, are the specifications guidance for the use of compost on, are there specifications or guidance for the use of compost on Michigan farms? And would you expect this to further reduce expenses in comparison to traditional fertilizer? Archie, do you have a thought there? And Wayne might also want to offer.
Really, I don't.
Response.
I'd like to ask John if he would address that question. I don't really have information about that. Maybe he does, but I don't have it.
Okay, Wayne, would you, I believe
Yeah,
John had to step off, but yeah, Wayne, would you like
Yeah,
to
I
answer
saw
that?
John just had to step off for another event. You know, I'm not aware of what guidance they have in Michigan for use of compost. I suspect that they do. Most states do have guidance through their Cooperative Extension Service and their NRCS offices on use of compost. Some states are obviously much more engaged in use of compost than others. The one that comes to mind that really goes gangbusters is California. But you know, you would expect that the use of compost would allow further reductions in input costs, including fertilizers. One of the aspects of compost is not just the additional nutrients that's in the compost itself, but when you add compost, you're adding all that organic material, and what that does is it really helps improve the physical conditions of the soil too, not just the nutrient availability, but in the biological activity. But it also helps improve the physical aspects to where now you can improve your aggregation and your structure in your soil, and that allows now the roots to penetrate more freely, to scavenge for nutrients, to take up water, and a lot of those nutrients, of course, are carried in the water. And so it's not just a matter of the benefits of the nutrients in the compost itself, but it's the benefits to the rooting medium that you are influencing that can affect the ability of the plant to take up those nutrients. So I hope that covers it well enough for you.
All right, Dr. Honeycutt. Um, Dr. Flanders, Kevin asks, concerning cover crop timing and given the late harvest date for corn and the shorter growing season in Michigan, how many of these producers were interseeding cover crops into corn versus planting cover crops immediately following a corn harvest?
We did collect that information. We haven't tabulated it at this point. That will be something that we can present in our final analysis of 100 farms. But yes, interseeding would be common. It was common in all of our sample. That interseeding is when you plant the cover crop into the previous crop that's still existing, instead of waiting till the crop is harvested. There are several ways to do it. Some of them will go in, if it's a corn crop, at B4, when they're putting in the application, they would also put in the cover crop at that point. Some of them would do it after that. Before they harvested the crop, they would come in and interseed it, and there's specialized equipment in which you can do that. And even some of them at the same time they're harvesting the corn crop, they're also planting the cover crop seed. But that is one way to deal with planting cover crops in northern latitudes, is to interseed the cover crop seed before you harvest the previous crop.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Mary asks, and Wayne, it looks like you might want to take this one. What were the notable differences or similarities between the Michigan results and the results from the other states, both in changes to net farm income and reported additional benefits? Dr. Honeycutt, are you able to?
Yeah, sorry about
Tack it
that.
on.
I
It's all right.
accidentally had myself muted.
No problem.
Yeah, one of the things that was really similar that really stuck out was that some 97% of the 100 farmers that were interviewed indicated that they experienced increased resilience to things like drought and heavy precipitation. And, many of them described that as comparing what their neighbors were experiencing, impacts, on yield, for example, during the drought period. And so that was a real common theme. Another was that 83% of the 100 reported reduced fertilizer inputs. And over 90, I believe it was 93% of them described increased access to their fields. And so these are, of course, are really consistent with like building organic matter in their soils and building available water holding capacity and enhancing nutrient availability from the organic matter that allowed them to reduce those fertilizer inputs. And so those are some real consistencies across all 100 farms. Now, the Michigan farms themselves, they did have a bit lower average increase in net farm income for corn. I don't know that I have an explanation for that. But it was in generally a bit lower than the others for corn, but not for soybean. It was right along the same line with soybean. But what I understand from speaking with farmers is they generally talk about soybean as being more forgiving when you try new management practices. And the ones that I've spoken to say, yeah, they like, if they're going to try new management practice, they like to try it in their soybean crop first because they say it's more forgiving. And so I think that that's probably much more meaningful, to them than it is to me, perhaps. I'm sure that they really kind of understand what they're talking about there before more than I do. But I would say that, the Michigan farm was very much in line. Michigan farms, I should say, were in line with the other 90 farmers that we interviewed regarding impact on increase in farm income for soybean, just a bit lower for corn.
All right. Terrific. Well, I think we have a time for a couple more questions here. Bill asks, Dr. Flanders, interested to hear more about the operation that was taking the cover crop off as a forage. I believe it sounded like the best return per acre, but were there any drawbacks?
We had only a few farmers in our entire sample, and one of them was in the Michigan sample that either grazed cover crops or harvested cover crops for forage. We didn't have any reports of drawbacks. Of course, anything that there's it's going to have to be properly managed, but none of the farmers who were doing this, even the one in Michigan, didn't report any drawbacks. And in general, the farmers who were doing this were reporting farmers who were growing cover crops and not doing this are having a missed opportunity. That this is a good way to increase income, is either grazing the cover crops on your cattle or leasing it out. But if you don't do that, you can harvest it and sell it for forage. And many times farmers will produce cover crops and cut it for forage when on the cover crop before one crop but not the other. They don't necessarily do it on both, but in general, we can state from the information we obtained in our sample that this is a good opportunity for farmers to increase income is by either grazing the cover crop or cutting it for forage.
All right, and then the last question, Dr. Flanders, Kristen asks, do you take into account the experience of the producer? For example, for the farms that reported negative net farm income, were those farms that were more so at the 5-year range for adoption versus producers that may have been more experienced?
In this documentation, we didn't account for that. Of course, anytime you adopt a soil health management system, the longer you do it, you're probably going to get better at it, less likely to have a decrease in net farm income. But at this point, we haven't documented a correlation between years in the practice and low levels of net farm income.
Mm-hmm. Wasn't addressed in the study. And the last question, Dr. Flanders, that just came in, Catherine asks quickly, which cover crops were used by the farmers in this sample in Michigan, by the 10 farmers in Michigan? Do you know?
We have it recorded, but it would not be any different for me and the rest of them who are using cover crops. It varies. Some of them just use one cover crop, winter cereal rye. Some of them use a mix species that includes grasses, brassicas, legumes. It varies, but I don't have it written down right now to read them off to, but we do have that information. Yes,
and will that information
it does vary from one species to multi-species.
And will that information, Dr. Flanders, be available in that final report? Do you know if we'll include
We will include as much of that as we can properly document. I know we're going to have the number of species, but we'll also give a list of the species by name, by broad category.
Terrific.
Such as brassicas, legumes, grasses.
Terrific. Okay, well, thank you, Dr. Flanders, Dr. Honeycutt, and Mr. Sorley, and thank you all to the attendees for joining us today in the economics of soil health systems on Michigan farms. If you do have 2 minutes, we would kindly ask that you please take an opportunity to give us your feedback in the window when the webinar closes. That really helps us improve future webinars. Both the fact sheet and the recording of today's webinar will be available on the Soil Health Institute's website at soilhealthinstitute.org/economics. Thank you again for joining us, and I hope you have a wonderful afternoon.